Our State of the U.S. story. The FBI reportedly warned that an attack on the Capitol was planned for January 6th. Yet not as much preventative action was taken as you'd expect. Was this genuine incompetence or perhaps a sorry attempt to blame President Trump for inciting violence by letting it all just play out? On Tuesday, the FBI announced that it received information prior to the events of January 6th suggesting there would be a, quote, war on the Capitol, despite earlier reports to the contrary, of having no such information. The FBI alerted D.C. law enforcement through a joint terrorism task force system, and the NYPD reportedly provided Capitol Police with similar warnings. Mounting evidence now suggests these attacks were pre-planned, such as the presence of carefully constructed IEDs. Provided this evidence, the chief federal prosecutor in Washington has announced he will be pursuing conspiracy charges. These reports, along with the fact that the attacks began before the president's speech even concluded, seem to clear him of allegations that he was inciting violence. With me now to discuss is biostatistician and founder of JunkScience.com, Steve Milloy. Welcome back, Steve.
Hey, Kara. Thanks for having me.
Great. So time and time again, we see reports of the FBI not following up on credible threats, while at the same time operating as a sort of political enforcement arm for Democrats. Could that be somewhat what we're seeing here to some degree?
Well, this is just really shocking. Yesterday at the news conference the FBI put on, they admitted that they knew beforehand that there was going to be trouble at the Capitol. They called the Capitol Police and just left it there, as they said, and left it where they didn't do anything. And, it gets even more astounding. In today's Washington Post on the front page, there's a big article about how the FBI knew about this, lied to the media on Friday that they knew nothing, had no warning. And here we have President Trump, who's just been impeached for the second time for insurrection. Well, the FBI knew what was going to happen, but the FBI really did nothing. They could have stopped this. They could have protected the Capitol, but they opted not to. And you got to wonder, why is that? My father worked in FBI counterintelligence, the same guys that are monitoring all these, so-called extremist groups. And I know that my father, when he was with the FBI, when they found out about stuff like this, they worked to prevent it. They didn't, just let it go. And so, when you add this to, the prior 4 years with Russiagate and how Russiagate started, you got to wonder, is this like the final act in, the 4-year-long coup?
What do you think that the FBI should have done to help prevent some of the breaching that we saw at the Capitol? We know that there were some calls for increased law enforcement presence, but that was denied by D.C. officials.
Yeah. Well, somebody really dropped the ball here. And, instead of rushing to impeach the president, they should be rushing to investigate why the FBI didn't do anything. Yeah, the FBI has hundreds of agents it could have deployed. The Capitol Police, they have thousands of people they could have deployed. There's also the National Guard. Why was none of this done? Where was D.C. police? It almost makes you wonder, they just let this happen so that they could set President Trump up for this impeachment. This is awful. This is terrible. This is much worse than anything President Trump said at that rally, which, by the way, he said, do everything peacefully. Now, in law, there's this doctrine, the last clear chance. And fault lies with the person who had the last clear chance to prevent whatever accident, tragedy, whatever. And in this case, it's clearly the FBI. They knew but did nothing.
You ask where the FBI was, and I'm thinking perhaps they were in the back of one of their offices shredding all the files they have of Hunter Biden's investigations because they're terrified of after January 20th. They're just shredding it all now.
Right. And then really, where's the rest of the media? The Washington Post put the story on its front page, and it's also on the front page of the New York Times. But it's almost like they could say, well, we put it there, so we covered it. There's no follow-up. No one is pressing the FBI any of this or Capitol Police. There's just this rush to impeach President Trump. There's more here than, meets the eye.
Definitely, because as we've seen from some of the videos that have come out about that day, you see in some areas of the Capitol, you do see some violent agitators, some violent protesters attacking police and busting their way, breaking down doors and glass of windows to get into the Capitol building. Though I should add that the few agitators who did that were usually booed and shouted down by the hundreds and thousands of other patriots, really, who were there with them saying, we're not here for violence. But you see that, and then, of course, you see in other areas of the Capitol, that the doors were flung wide open by police, and they helped to usher in hundreds and perhaps even thousands of protesters who then walked into the Capitol, and many of them just looked so confused. I saw a lot of older citizens. I saw some teenagers even, and they just kind of were standing inside the Capitol not knowing what to do next.
Yeah, President Trump is really getting the bum's rush here. Democrats and weak-kneed Republicans did this to Richard Nixon in 1974. They acted on this so-called smoking gun tape, which had nothing to do with Watergate, ironically. And President Trump is getting the same treatment here. And, people laugh when you say deep state. No, it's real. There's something going on here. And they want to get rid of President Trump so fast that no one has a chance to actually look into what happened.
And not only get rid of President Trump, but to get rid of the rights of so many millions, tens of millions of American citizens as well. There's a reason why they're trying to equate this with 9/11, because what happened after 9/11, we got the DHS, we got the TSA, we got all those NSA spying programs, the Patriot Act, you got all that surveillance that scooped up a lot of American citizens as well. A lot of them got caught up in the crosshairs of that. So it seems like they're trying to incite their own tensions, their own violence after January 6th. We see Congresswoman AOC, for example, doing all the media rounds, saying that perhaps up to half of her colleagues could have been killed that day. They were nowhere near, coming to that, and yet that's what she's saying. And is that not incitement of violence on her part against Trump supporters who had nothing to do with this?
Yeah, no, this is a never waste a crisis. And, things can happen quickly, like in October 17, when the Bolsheviks overthrew the Mensheviks and took control of Russia. There's a lot of similarity here, and then you also have this, the FBI has all this information it gathers since the Cold War. It's just collected a lot of information on America's enemies, but it rarely did anything with it. And this is another example of that, where they know bad stuff is going to happen, but they just can't bring themselves to do anything. And, our media ought to be asking why. Why is that? You knew, but you didn't do anything. And look what happened.
You're exactly right. And now we see January 20th. It's coming up. It's right around the corner. And what I fear is that President Trump will continue to be legally hounded by Democrats even after he's out of office.
Well, right. I mean, some of them have been talking about pressing criminal charges. And I've heard this in the media. People want criminal charges for incitement. Well, he didn't incite anybody. He said, protest peacefully. And then the FBI did know of people who were prepared to cause problems, but did nothing. There were people that came with pipe bombs and paint and all sorts of other stuff. And the FBI knew this was happening, but did nothing. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah, of course. And the people who are doing the impeaching right now, especially all the Democrats, where were they the last year with all the BLM and Antifa riots? They were right there with them, either marching in the streets with them, as Kamala herself did, bailing them out, sometimes even bailing out suspected murderers as well, marching in lockstep. And we lost over 30 American citizens were killed during that so-called summer of love, as the Seattle mayor tried to call it. So to see them on their high horses, and I saw Jerry Nadler up there today during the impeachment proceedings, and he was the one who back in the 90s, he was in Clinton's ear to have him commute the sentence of Susan Rosenberg, who's now with BLM, and she actually is suspected of planting a bomb that went off in 1983 in the Senate wing of the Capitol building. And to see him up there and accusing President Trump of inciting violence is it's just too much for me to bear. The irony, the hypocrisy, the double standards, all of it. But Steve, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And on that